everyone. I'm Donna Marie, death doula, celebrant, soul doula, end of life educator, and guide. I am also the host of the Sacred Moments podcast, which is a place to normalize heartfelt conversations around mortality, grief, love legacy, and end of life planning. Today's conversation is with Rhyena Halpern. Her experiences as a young adult are interesting experiences of grief and tragic death. I met Rhyena through the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation's Death Cafe. And through those death cafes, I learned the importance of sitting with silence, even when it's uncomfortable. You'll hear Ryena's voice. She's got a very relaxing tone. She's a Jubu. You'll learn what that is. And I really hope you gain a lot from this conversation. So welcome to the Sacred Moments podcast. Before we move forward, please don't forget, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that notification bell so that you know when new episodes are available. Like our content, share your comments. We want to hear from you.
Well, I started on the spiritual path when I was about 15. I was really influenced by Eastern philosophies that, sects that derive from Hinduism and Buddhism. And the whole approach to death in Eastern philosophy um, is kind of liberated, right? I mean, it's kind of that we continue, that there's reincarnation, that we're part of some kind of cosmic consciousness, that the body is something we inhabit, but the soul carries on, right? So, uh, that being said, I ended up having very traumatic experiences of death in my 20s that I could not understand or wrap my mind around. And it took me a long time to get comfortable with it. And a few things happened that were very painful. And I can talk about those individual stories, but I think it was the aggregate of them that really I just did not know how to think about death anymore. I basically trusted it, but I was very traumatized. And what happened in brief was a woman that I did social activist work with was brutally murdered one night as she slept in her house. And then the next year, I ended up in this bizarre coincidence being this support person for another woman that I didn't know very well, that I literally kind of ran into when she was breaking down because of news that her friend had been raped and murdered. And the following year, the same rapist and murderer murdered my friend.
Gosh.
And I was all of this, was living in Washington I was in college, undergraduate school, and all these murders of these three women, it was actually four women. Um, he murdered 10 women, and four of them were all from our college.
Oh my goodness.
And he was located in the Bay Area. He had just gotten out of prison after 20 years for rape, and he sat on trails at Mount Tamalpais and Point Reyes, which are very well-known national parks here in this area that I now live. And so when my friend was murdered, It was already enough for me that these other women were murdered. And then my friend was murdered. She was just waiting for her boyfriend, who was a ranger, to get off of work. She took a short hike by herself. I just couldn't believe that. I just could not get over that. And her murder was quite brutal. There was torture and execution after the rape. And I really struggled with it a lot. And one thing I did that helped me for the next, I think it was more than a decade, was I wrote letters to her mother every month or so. And she wrote me back for a very long time until her death. And that kept my friend alive, I think, for both of us in this way. Um, Very traumatic. And I remember I used to live in Sacramento, and I was going on a retreat with this group of women, and I didn't connect that where we were going was to Point Reyes.
Mm.
And we got there, and I just completely fell apart. It's like 30 years later.
Oh, wow.
So, I mean, it has been a lasting event for me. So, that being said, about 2 or 3 years later, I was in graduate school in Los Angeles, and another student friend said, "Oh, I feel a lump here in my chest." And I'm like, "Oh, it's just muscles here. I'm a massage therapist. Let me work it out for you." And he died of a rare cancer. He was like 22 years old, 25 years old within a year. And then the department secretary, she and her son were in this car accident, and they died instantly. So there just were all these traumatic, sudden, violent deaths. And I just really had a hard time dealing with it. So that was all in my 20s. And then I did volunteer work with people with HIV. And so there were a lot of deaths constantly. So eventually, I um, became a hospice volunteer right before I had children, and I was just always drawn to that work. I didn't consciously connect it to these deaths. I connected it to, my spiritual path, etc. And then my sister got sick and died after a 5-year battle of breast cancer that had metastasized to her brain. So just more death, there had been grandparents and aunts and uncles, etc., and then my sister. And then this amazing thing truly happened, and that was my mom, who had moved out to be with me, with us 4 years earlier, had the most amazing death. And this really changed me. I think my DNA was so mind-blowing. She was ready for death. We talked about all her wishes. We prepared all her paperwork. We started making the kind of gallows humor jokes that come when you talk about death, that can be just really some really deep guttural laughs. And she reached for death. And I remember it was my 60th birthday, and I was like, "Okay, Mom, my family was taking me to New York City for a week or a week or so for my birthday." And I was like, "Okay, you cannot die while I am gone." And she's like, "Okay, but when you come back." And sure enough, 2 days after I got back, she had a mild cardiac event. She had been on hospice for 2.5 years,
Wow.
and she took to her deathbed and she just slowly let go. She died about 9 days later. It was 5 years and 2 hours to the day after my sister had died. And she reached for death. She wanted death. She was so ready. She was 94. She felt her body breaking down. Her mind was clear, but she was ready to go. And this whole idea of consciously choosing
Yeah.
to reach for death, to give yourself to death, as opposed to violently being taken from life, was so healing and magnificent to me. And then the most amazing thing happened after that, which was that not only had she given me this gift of being ready to die, at peace with dying, but I felt no grief. What I knew of as grief, the pain and the sorrow and the suffering, I did not feel. I just felt lifted up by the light and love that she left with. And so there was this whole aha, excuse me, this whole aha experience of, oh, grief, the way I knew grief. Grief is not mandatory. Like if you die when you're ready, when you're reaching for it, when everything's been said, and there's nothing left undone, then you give this gift to those you leave behind, which is what people worry about so much on their deathbed, right? Is, are my loved ones going to be okay
Yes.
if I go now, and just, you know what I'm talking about. And so it was just this amazing gift. And in fact, I remember hospice called me. They call at, I think, like 6 months later or some period of time after the death to see how, to check in with me. How am I doing? And I remember, and they were, very concerned about my grief level and the suffering and the pain. And I remember pushing back a little on like that assumption that I'm in grief because that felt like a dishonoring to my mom
Yes.
because I just felt love, you know. And then, they say grief is love with nowhere to go, but I just felt love and love and love. And so that was a really big healing for me. I started volunteering at my third hospice at that point again. And one day, this woman at Mission Hospice said, you should be an end of life doula. And I was like, what is that? And she said, what you do, but more so,
Yes.
more so, it's more. And I was like, yes, yep. And hey, here I am.
That is, first off, having those tragic deaths as a young adult. I can't even fathom how you came back from that. Thank goodness for the experience, the grace, the experience with your mom, because again, that was a gift for you. And as you stated, also healing. I'd like to talk a bit about what steps did you take, or can you share a bit about how the universe unfolded in helping you to care for yourself and process those emotions and that grief?
You know, now that I'm in my 60s, I can say denial
Hmm.
has its purpose in terms of coping and going on. And because I had a spiritual path that looked at death in a very positive way, life and death on a continuum, I did have this basic belief that it was okay, dying was okay. I could not reconcile with the violent deaths.
Yes.
And I think especially my friend's death, that was the one. I think there was some denial, there was pain. I wrote stories about it. I vented about it. I didn't think about it. I mean, I stayed in touch with her mom. I mean, there was just I there was no path, but there was time. And time, they say time is God, right? If there's any God, it's time. And
Hmm.
time heals all wounds. I'm not sure it healed the wound, but it just gave me enough space. And then, as I got older in my 30s and 40s, there's just more death that I know of to deal with. And a lot of it is not traumatic. It's, more what we think of as normal death. That's from a terminal illness or
Yeah.
old age, because 90% of us die that way. Only
Yes.
10% of deaths are violent, sudden, unanticipated. So I think it was just time, just getting used to it. I mean, I don't know,
Yeah.
I don't have the answer. I just keep going with it.
Yeah.
But my mom's death was just an incredible gift of what could be. And
Yeah.
that's what I feel most inspired by in teaching and working with clients and facilitating groups and giving presentations is just, can we find that space where we are okay with dying? And isn't that kind of the path to living fully? It's
Yes,
by being
absolutely.
able to embrace death. And, many traditions um, say this. The Bhutanese say, if you think about death 5 times a day, you'll live a happier life. Um, there's just a lot of philosophical underpinnings that rely on this whole notion of accepting death leads to a more fulfilling life, whether it's more happier or more purposeful. And I believe that. I think holding on to death, like that, we want to have a peaceful death. We want to be able to talk to our loved ones about our wishes. We want to be able to say goodbye. We want a sense of completion. We don't for sure know what happens next, but we know this is a body that remains after we die. So we know that there's a spirit that continues on, whether it's in the hearts of the people who love us or in some ethereal level.
Yeah.
We continue. It's a great movement to be part of, and I feel so honored to be part of people just talking about death, people who can laugh in that conversation, making it normal, and then hopefully having that peace. Some people have such a hard time leaving their bodies. You just don't know if death is going to come easily or if it's going to be difficult. But we do have control over how accepting, how peaceful we could be around death. And so that's what I like to focus on and like to work with people about.
How do you work with people to help them develop this more positive outlook and have these positive conversations about death and end of life? You do a whole lot. And so can you share a bit about how you help people at the end of life and the work you do with helping people really just reflect over their life?
So I work with people in a few different ways. I started off I've always been very into holistic health. And I started off when I retired from the work world. I started off as a functional medicine health coach. And I ended up loving the hospice volunteering work so much that I switched and became an end of life doula who sometimes works with people on health and wellness coaching. But I call it third act coaching because I focus on people who are older and maybe they've retired from the work world, maybe they've finished raising their children. Maybe they're looking ahead to what they want for the next phase of their life. And so sometimes, they're embarking on new goals. They have a whole lifestyle they want. And I really, really enjoy designing with them what is it you want with your precious life and how can we build it? How can we design it? How can we create it? So that's third act coaching. And it's geared more for people who are retired, I would say 55 and older, going through major transitions in life. And it leads right into the end of life work because the work with clients that I like to do, it is a kind of coaching because I really like to work with people, at some point while they're still well or early in their illness to really make a plan, design the end of their life. What are their wishes? What are their needs? What's left unfinished? Who do they have to say goodbye to? Do they want to do some life review, legacy work, create an ethical will? What is it that they want? And I just really enjoy those conversations and helping people get to what they want. And then, hopefully they have some more time and then they call me back when they're ready to end their days. I kind of liken being a doula to like, well, people have their lawyers and they have their beauty salon or hair cutters and they have their massage therapists and they have their physical therapists, their doctors, people have people that they turn to when they need their services.
Yes.
And to me, with that, the ideal way to work with a doula, or the way I ideally like to work, is get to know the person, develop trust, get to know some of their people that they love, that are so important to them in their life, and then, work out this end of life plan that takes on really all their wishes, help them try to achieve as much of this plan as they can, and then go away. And then they call me back when they're ready, just like they call up their, hair beautician
Yeah.
when they're ready for a haircut. So that's my most ideal way to work. I mean, a lot of times people um, contact a doula and die fairly fast. A lot of times they get on hospice and die fairly fast. I mean, statistically, it's most people are on hospice less than a month. And the largest amount is less than a week when it's in that month. So people wait. And what I like is people embracing this early. That's the coaching, third act coaching, and the end of life doula work. And then as a conscious dying educator, I've been leading these death cafes online for Mission Hospice and the Elisabeth Kübler-Ross Foundation um, for since April 2020. So it was like 3 weeks after lockdown, we started this. We had been doing some in person, but it was quarterly, and we just did it weekly. So, because people needed it, you know. So I love the death cafes, and it's really some people have been there the whole time, or
Yeah.
it's
I've
quite a
seen.
few years. We always have new people. It's completely open and welcoming to all. And we get people who are sick and dying. We get people who are in grief. We get people who are anticipating being in grief because um, they're taking care of someone who is terminally ill. We get students who have to come to a death cafe as part of their social work curriculum. We get doulas who are interested. We get people who um, are curious about it because they know they're not that comfortable with death and dying. So you get all sorts of people. And even though it's mostly United States, we had people from Argentina and India and England and all over. We have Canadians quite often too. So I just really love the Death Cafe, and it's given me a big sense of community and connection. And I just really love doing that. And then I teach a couple classes, like you mentioned, I designed them. One is End of Life Intentions for Dummies, Pragmatists, and Seekers. And the other is Spiritual Dimensions of Nearing Death. And they're both a mixture of lecture, presentation, guided visualizations, video clips, readings, and we just really explore these topics more. I also, taught workshops in advanced care directives because I think everybody should have one, like when they become 18. Like if you can vote, you can have an advanced care.
Yes. I will say also in the death cafes, as you were speaking, I was thinking about my experience and how maybe it started during the COVID-19 shutdown, and I was one of those people who came and left. And then when I was forced to go back in the office, I remember listening with my camera off a lot because it was at work and multitasking and listening and recognizing the need to be silent because I felt myself going back to that busyness. And I knew I wanted to implement lessons gained during the shutdown, and your Death Cafe helped me so much. And another thing, I didn't actually expect what I gained. It was such a beautiful surprise to me. And hearing individuals in their vulnerability, sometimes not having anyone else to talk to or anyone who wanted to listen, coming to that space was so healing for so many people. And that made me understand really even more the importance of the work we do with our doula heart, being present and allowing other people to express themselves, allowing them to recognize that they have inner wisdom that is their own guidance, and that there's nothing we can do but help them along their path as they reveal to us without even knowing. In some cases they'll reveal to you what they need and what they want and who they are, and we get to mirror that back to them.
I had this one client who was in his 90s, bedridden, very close to death. He had cancer, and his daughters were in their 60s, and were still afraid of him because he had been
Mm,
such a harsh, violent, angry, misogynistic man to them
mm,
and to their mom. And, they were still kind of physically afraid. So they wanted a doula, they wanted him to be taken care of, but they didn't want to see him. I have to say, I thought that was very reasonable of them and a kind of a loving gesture considering the situation. But that is not like if I had to have a lot of clients like that, I don't, that would, I would, yeah, I love loving my clients.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So speaking of loving clients, I have a few clients with memory issues and they're in memory care facilities. Any wisdom, words of wisdom or guidance that you might have for other doula listening, and even a family member? Because I'm sure just as a doula, I'm not exactly sure how to show up, and this space is new for me. Family members, like the family you just talked about, that was very reasonable and caring and responsible. But some people don't know how to show up and they are actually the caregiver. And so any thoughts?
Being a caregiver and is such hard work.
Oh, yes.
It is so hard. And about a third of caregivers die before their person
Yes.
caring for the stress and the lack of, time and space to care for oneself. I feel like the most important thing is to get an advanced care directive that states your wishes while you still.
Yes.
And I think that is one of the most important things to do. And, being there for someone with cognitive decline, I think it's just loving them no matter what, and dignifying their life, their existence, and validating their wants and needs. Um, Again, really complex
Oh, yeah.
caregiving and cognitive decline, both really complex topics with lots of social issues. The advanced directives are just absolutely important. Now, that being said, advanced directives were made for people with physical decline. We're not with cognitive decline. And now we're seeing, first we saw addendums, and now we're seeing actual advanced care directives that have a whole lot of attention given to cognitive decline. It
Mhm.
is still very hard to enforce, but it is the best thing to have if the caregiver has to make some decisions. So if I had cognitive decline, I would make sure I had advanced care directive, that I had videotaped myself several times saying my wishes, that I had notified everybody that I loved, that loved me, of my wishes. I would make it as clear as possible, because if I was alive with severe cognitive decline and had said, I want to stop eating and drinking, if I am unhappy, don't recognize my kids, and can't dress myself, let's just say those three things, that was where I wanted to decline all food and drink. And then, but I don't know it anymore. And I'm in a facility and an aide walks by and I says, "Oh, I'm hungry. Can I have something?" And they bring it to me.
Yeah.
That's why, I would let everyone know, and make sure my caregiver person had all the info that they could give the facility. And I think we're going to see this more and more arise, um, just because dementia it's a real thing. I have noticed what what after death is like for the loved ones who've lost their person, when everything is in place, when they know the person's wishes, they have the advanced care directive, they have the will or the trust, they know which heirlooms, or, that pin, who it should go to,
Yes.
versus the people who don't know. They didn't talk.
Yeah.
They didn't know their wishes. And um, none of these conversations happened. They didn't get to say goodbye. There's just so much guilt and regret. The whole woulda, shoulda, coulda thing is
Mm.
so painful because death, if nothing else, is final. It is friggin' final,
Yeah.
that's it. So I do feel like people move through their process. I call it a process of loss because grief is optional depending on where you're at. They move through losing their person, the loss in different ways. Some depends on them and their composition, their emotions, their spirituality, but a lot depends on how much they are in regret. If there's zero regret, the loss is a lot easier. It's kind of basic math. It's so basic. I mean, I'm thinking of this woman who, like, for 5 years could not cope with her mom's death and couldn't, like, get rid of her stuff and couldn't, and, just sitting and listening to her, it was all regret. It was
Yeah.
just regret. And I do think there is something to this idea of grief and regret. Because if you don't have the grief, regret, if you, everything has been said, their wishes, you've shared your love. If you don't have that burden, you can keep going in a way that is much less painful. I'm not saying it's not, that loss isn't painful, but there's this whole question of how do we move on after loss? How do we find our way? We are changed by deep loss, by profound loss, right? We are changed. Our person isn't there. Um, and we're not going to ever be unchanged. It is part of our life story. And so to me, it's just math. If you can give your people the gift of dying with acceptance and readiness, with them knowing all your wishes, with having whatever conversations need to happen before you die. It's just an incredible gift for the people that you love who are still alive, who are going to go on without you for their lives. It's just a huge gift. And, I'm so grateful for my mom giving me that. And, I was thinking about her lately. I have, I've been missing her. It's like, God, it'd sure be nice to have a mom still. Sure be nice I'd love to talk to her. My daughter's getting married in May. It's like, God, I wish I could talk to my mom about it. I wish she could come. So I have these thoughts, but I don't have pain, the
Yeah.
heavy pain. I have these thoughts. They're like little bursts and they're love pods.
Yes.
And I don't know, I'm really grateful for
How
that.
do you mentioned a good death earlier, and with this grief and regret talk, how do you in general define a good death, and how do you define a good death for yourself?
Well, like I said before, we don't have a lot of control, physically. I mean, some of us have, the body wants to live. The heart's going to keep beating. I had a client who was on hospice for 2.5 years. There was no way she, I could not believe she could stay alive. I just could not believe it. She was so emaciated and so sick, but she stayed alive. There, the body, the heart, as long as that heart keeps pumping, the body's going to put up with a lot. So we don't have a lot of control. She just wanted to die. She wished she could have died, but anyway, this was a hospice patient, not a end-of-life doula client. But anyway, she couldn't get out of here easily, and she wanted to. So we don't control that, but excuse me. But like I said before, we have control over our level of acceptance and peacefulness about dying. And that's what I consider a good death. And not by if how our body lets go, but just how our mind embraces it. When my sister died, she was very, very bitter and angry. That is a very, I wish she could have felt more peaceful and more accepting. She did not ever get to that place. And I am very sad about that.
Yeah.
So for me, what you asked about my own death, yeah, I hope that I will have grace bestowed upon me to be able to accept peacefully my death because it is coming.
Yes.
It is coming.
Yeah.
And older I get, and the more people I know who've died, it's a one-way street. And
Yes.
so, might as well. One thing somebody said, who'd been coming to my death cafe for like 3 years, he said, I notice all you really have to do is show up in these rooms once a week for, a couple years, and your fear of death is less.
Mhm.
You don't have to really do very much, just show up.
Yes.
And I think this is a great thing, just normalizing death instead of fearing it and trying to keep it at bay, just normalizing it and being able to plan for it, talk about it. When the time comes, embrace it. Those are the things I hope for that I will be able to do. I can't say I feel the same way about sudden violent
Yes.
death.
I, they're
This
different.
is just not, and also, sick children. These are just things I, they're in a different category to me.
I agree. Yes.
And dealing with, so when there's a sudden violent death, I really haven't had clients who are dealing with that. And in this case, the client would be the family, right?
Yeah.
So I haven't had that. There's a lot of grief therapists and coaches, and this is more their field.
Thank you for spending this sacred moment in time with us on the Sacred Moments podcast. Until next time, please remember, as Bell Hooks reminds us, that death is with us as long as we're alive. It is the shadow companion walking every step of the way with us. And when we try to deny it, we separate ourselves from our own truth.